So when you're at your highest, don't think that you're the best thing that's ever been. And when you're at your lowest, don't think you're the worst thing that's ever been. Be aware that life is this sort of wave, and if you can pay attention to what's happening at the highest highs and the lowest lows, you'll do okay.
Did you have a gut feeling or just this belief in you that one day you'll be this successful person that you are now?
2008, 2009, people said, "You're an idiot. Like, what are you doing?" I'm going to do it. I'll make a success of it.
Was there any point in your journey that you deem as that's like one of the most difficult things I went through, and I'm glad that I came out of it?
I had to lose the brand that I'd spent 5 years creating. 2020 became a really tough year. It became a make or break year.
What was one thing that you used to put on a pedestal that you no longer sort of see it that way anymore?
All right, he's rogue and brilliant.
If you could share a little bit about how you founded TBLS to how it is now. Has it always been, smooth sailing, or how is it like?
What's the total opposite of smooth sailing? Rough waters, choppy waters? No, it's been, and it is, and it remains challenging in every aspect, but that doesn't make it bad. That's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it fun. That's what encourages me to be a bit of a chameleon through my career, to adapt to what's happening. Right now we have, of course, all the conversation around AI and technology, and will copywriters and brand language people exist in future, and that will just take some adapting as well. And I know other writers and other brand language experts who are just starting to adapt and fit AI into their communications and work with it and work. So that will be the next challenge. But actually, so to go right back, I studied writing. I loved writing. Wasn't a great reader. That's always an interesting one for people. Never been a great reader. I've always taken a scientific approach, and a lot of writers will hate me for saying that, especially teachers of writing, because they'll say, you have to read, you have to read, you have to read. I did read, but I read in a very scientific way. I was fascinated by George Orwell, Ernest Hemingway, how they phrased things to have an effect on somebody. So I dissected. When I was at college, I used to, this sounds very sad, I'm sure, but I used to sit in my car at lunchtimes and read an essay by George Orwell and analyze it. I'd look at the words and the phrases that were being used, and I'd think, why has that person done it that way? Why have they put the comma there and not put the comma there? Why have they cut that sentence into two when I might have left it as one? And I just became really deeply analytical about language. As a result of that, I started to mimic writers. So I'd try and write like Hemingway, and that kind of staccato-y or straight to the point style, that American lit style of the early to mid 20th century. And that taught me to be aware of language, constantly aware of advertising and marketing, without me really being aware that that's what was happening. But when I was 15, 16, 17, I was clearly starting to see language around me and think about language around me. So I studied creative writing at undergrad. I then went on to study professional writing, this new course called professional writing. I moved down to Cornwall in the southwest of the country, and I studied professional writing. But I studied creative non-fiction, travel writing, short story writing, script writing. I never really thought about moving into the world of business and brands, not because I didn't want to. I just didn't. I thought, like perhaps some of your listeners and viewers will be thinking here, that language just miraculously appeared in the world of brand and business. I never thought that there were writers, creators behind it. So I became more aware of that during my postgraduate degree. And then I started writing a travel memoir. I started blogging, this journey around the UK that I was doing. I traveled for a year by the light of the full moon. I wrote a blog about it, and I got lots of followers on there. We're now talking 2008, 2009, I started to make this transition. So this does lead me into my career, I promise. Because what happened was, through being a creative writer, and I suppose I didn't see that I was marketing myself by creating a blog. And I got a small job as a copywriter in a marketing agency in my local town, and I did it for maybe 9 months. But language was, I'd fallen in love with language. I'd fallen in love with the potential of language. And it was a web development agency, so actual writing and language was quite low on the priority list. And I was fighting for it, and I never really got anywhere. I made brilliant friends. My best friends are still the designers who I worked with in the creative team within the studio. But I decided to go freelance. And I applied and I applied and I applied, and I got nowhere because everybody said you need more experience. And I said, how can I get the experience if you won't give me a job or even some work experience? So I stayed freelance, and I became this copywriter that I said to you about earlier. So I just wrote a lot. And through writing the Moonwalking, so the book is called Moonwalking.
That was your first, was it?
It was my first journey. It was my second. It took me 10 years to write, so I actually published another travel memoir in the meantime. But Moonwalking is twinned with, yeah. So that was a 10,000-mile road trip around the European continent, looking into the history of town twinning, which came out of the Second World War, and how towns have relationships with each other. So I've always been someone who's just thought, I've just had ideas and I've wanted to see them through. So I did those in the background. So I was a freelance copywriter as I marketed myself. I created some little business cards and did all the stuff that today, like in this world of constantly being able to tell people what you do and who you are, etc., it was a little bit different when I went freelance as a 24-year-old. 2008, 2009, people said, you're an idiot. Like, what are you doing? How are you going to get in touch with people? This is going to be really difficult for you. And I said, yeah, I know, but I can't get any experience elsewhere, so I'm going to do it. I'll make a success of it. So I carried on. The blog about Moonwalking attracted a chap called John Simmons. John is the guy who kind of termed verbal identity and tone of voice, and was the first to celebrate the importance of language in the world of brand. So the language within advertising, you generally have an art director and a copywriter who work with each other, and they both realize the value of the other. In the world of branding, so marketing and branding, design was always the lead. Visual identity was always the lead. John Simmons said, words are important. Words are important. You must consider words and language. John read my Moonwalking blog, and I messaged him and I said, could we have a coffee at some point? I'd love to meet you. I've just gone freelance as a copywriter. And I'll be honest with you, I don't really know what to do now. I've taken a big, bold step, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it. And he's the most generous man. And he said, of course, meet me for a coffee. And in the meantime, I'd had an idea. And I thought, I like having ideas. I'm going to share it with John. So this is going around the houses slightly, but I had an idea that I called copy is art. So in line with John's belief and my belief that copy, as in writing, is an art, like visual design and art is an art to people, all the visual stuff that's seen as an art. And I took it to John and I said, wouldn't it be great if we got writers to reflect on pieces of art that live in museums and galleries, but reflect on them creatively? Because I love going to exhibitions, but when I read the little caption beside the piece of art, it's always a kind of a dry explanation of what I'm seeing and about the artist. And I said, I went the other day and I sketched, I think it was the Fighting Temeraire Turner, and I wrote a poem in response to it. And I said, there, look, John. And he said, I love this, Rob. He said, I think this is great. I think that I'd like to know more about this idea. Go away and develop it and come back to me. So I went back to John with a more fleshed out copy as art idea, and it actually became, again, long story short, it became something called 26 Treasures, which was one of the lead exhibitions in the London Design Festival in 2010. So I learned that actually being a little bit cheeky and asking to meet people and sharing my ideas with people not only pleased me and made me love what I was doing, but also developed my career, developed my skills, got me in front of people. And I've really continued doing that for the last 15 years, being a little bit cheeky, asking the question that other people don't ask, taking the opportunity that's there. And back to your question about has it been plain sailing? No, because half of the time those those ideas get rejected. Moonwalking never found a publisher. We pitched it to publisher after publisher after publisher. In the end, I assembled all the people who I had met over the years, illustrators, typesetters, designers, someone within the publishing world, created the book like I did with Twinned With, and it got picked up by bookshops without the need of a publisher, because I thought, if no one else is going to do this, then I'm going to have to do it. So I've taken that spirit of trying, failing, trying, failing, trying, failing through my career, and to anyone who's trying to break into a business or start a business themselves, I think it's really the only way to do it, unless you get very lucky and you go from 0 to 100 in a second. I would have thought most people that doesn't happen.
How do you view these failures and rejections then?
I see it as a lesson and a little bit of a nudge to say, I don't stop, because if you stop, what are you going to do? Like, just go to bed and not bother getting up again. So that's not really an option. You can be knocked, but that doesn't define who you are or how successful you are. A great piece of advice when I had a bad breakup, a relationship breakup that led to the Moonwalking book and doing it, and a dear friend called David at the time said, it's not, Rob, I know you're down at the moment, but you have to remember it's not what happens to you that makes you who you are, it's what you do in response. And I've taken that through life, that I'll be rejected time and time again. I'll be rejected on different projects. I'll present a tone of voice and I'll think it's perfect for the brand, and they'll say, no, don't get it, I don't think it's right. And I can either cry and say, oh, you really don't like what I've done, or I can say, okay, let's have a conversation about it. And in that conversation, in that dialogue, actually some of what I've done makes more sense to the client, and they say, we get it now. Yes, yeah, no, that is working. And then they will explain their point of view, and I'll go, I didn't quite pick up on that, so let me adapt this in some way. And I think that's probably a lesson in life, is to open it up into conversation, find out what's working, what isn't working, and then adapt in some way. You have to continue adapting. Every day I'm adapting. I'm turning 40 this year. I started when I was 24 in this industry, and I would say that I'm learning as much now as I was learning when I was a 24-year-old, and I'm perhaps having more sort of successes in speech marks, but equally I'm having just as many knockbacks, and I'm learning from every one. So yeah, I think it's understanding that just if there's a challenge, it doesn't define who you are. If you're told that something's not right, it doesn't mean that you're no good as a person. It just means that you need to adapt in some way, put a bit more energy in, look at it slightly differently. And for me, that's the creative life. And I think of being a writer as being a creative person. And if you're not willing to adapt, then you're probably in the wrong business. If you're thinking that you're a writer, but you're only ever going to look for positive feedback, and if anyone ever says that's no good, you're going to start crying because they've upset you. Sorry, but that's not how life works. You need to be able to take those reactions from people, invite them. That's what I've learned, I think, is invite feedback constantly from people. I wrote a blog post recently. I said some of the best feedback I've ever had is from people who don't consider writing as a thing at all. They read my stuff. My mum is great at giving feedback. She just reads it and she says, I don't really understand what you're trying to say there. And you look at the famous authors who say if you can't, and the famous advertisers, copywriters who say if you can't communicate it to your sister or your mum or your nan, then it's not a clear piece of writing. Hemingway writes about beating writer's block by writing one true sentence. I think it's one true sentence that he says, and it's the sentence that isn't trying too hard to achieve something. It's the honest, clear piece of writing that comes out of you. And I'm striving constantly to become a simpler communicator, a clearer communicator. And to get there, I'm going to have to make a few mistakes as I go along. And I have to accept that that's absolutely fine, and that's a good thing. So here everyone, here's my work, and give me feedback on it. And I know a lot of writers and a lot of creative people who don't take that approach, and they must have a difficult time because they don't want to hear anything negative about what they do, and they're never going to please everybody. Therefore, they must live a challenging existence. Yeah, you've got to make mistakes and you've got to learn from them in some way and adapt and move in slightly different directions. Not be rocked so much that you give up, but yeah, change your ways a little bit, and something exciting will come from that slightly different direction.
From your journey so far, because what I'm hearing is that, and I love, and I'm very inspired by it. It's a lot of, you know, peaks and then getting knocked down and getting back up, etc. Was there any point in your journey that you deem as that's like one of the most difficult things I went through, and I'm glad that I came out of it?
My writing life is personal and professional. So I write for a living, but I write for a life as well. So I write travel memoirs. If they don't get published, I publish them. I get them out there. I write short stories that I'm thinking about. I had a lovely meeting yesterday with someone who was interested in my short stories, not buying them, but reading them. And so I might go and create a collection of short stories as well, which I'm really looking forward to putting. I've written them over the years and I've never collected them. And I think that's something I'd really like to do. So I've got one personal knockback that. So Moonwalking, as I said, came out of a really bad relationship breakup, a really tough one. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I went very, very low, like emotionally low, and I had to bring myself back out of it. And writing or planning and doing the traveling of the book helped me to get back up again. That was one of those moments where I could have just given up, I think. I could have just said, right, I'm going to go and get a job that everybody else does, and the writing life is just going to be too tough for me, because I wrote in response to what I was feeling. So as a result of the breakup, I was writing notes to myself, and I was really exploring all of those feelings. And it was tough. It was very, very tough. And I thought it would be easier not to be a writer. It would be easier not to be this analytical about my feelings. But I can't switch it off. Any writer listening to this will know that you can't just switch off being a writer. Your life is writing, your life is language. You don't switch that off, you live it. So that was really difficult, and it was a time where there were just creeping feelings of if a girlfriend's going to give up on you, then why would you follow your own dream? Like just do what everybody else does and get a job like everybody else. But I didn't. I persevered, and I did the traveling. I wrote the blog, and we know the story of that leading to John Simmons, etc. And then another challenging year was actually 2020, the COVID year, which was challenging for everybody. But a few things happened altogether. So The Table was my first studio that became the Brand Language Studio. I'd incorporated The Table as a limited company in 2000, and at the time of Gumtree, so about 2015. And I'd been running it without protecting it for 5 years, so legally protecting the brand and the trademark. Ironically, is it irony? It's something I smile at. One of my clients is the Chartered Institute of Trademark Attorneys. So I'd been writing about trademarks for a very long time, but I'd never thought to protect The Table. So in 2020, I was coming back from an international trip. I'd been to Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and in Australia. I'd spent about 6 weeks traveling around Australia running writing workshops, something called Verb, which I set up with Tim Rich, a colleague, and we were celebrating language to design agencies, and I had the most fantastic time. And then on the flight back, I got a cease and desist order saying another company has incorporated using The Table within their name, and they've applied for the trademark. And you could fight it if you wanted to on prior usage rights, but you might not win. And if you don't win, it will be quite expensive for you. So I had to lose the brand that I'd spent 5 years creating myself and put all of my energy and my skills into. Very quickly, I had to rebrand. I'm in the world of rebranding, so I kind of got it. But the Brand Language Studio came out of that. Also in 2020, my dad was diagnosed with a terminal cancer, which he's still fighting. He was turned 78 a couple of days ago, so he's still fighting on. But it was a bit of a shock. It was a bit of a shock to the system. And then so I had 3 things happen. COVID then kicked in, so I lost The Table's clients. Because they didn't, The Table disappeared and the Brand Language Studio was created, and I had to do that kind of transition from one to the other. But I was also taking my dad to hospital for various hospital trips, so I couldn't put my emotion and my time into that transition. So I thought, well, I'll meet my clients and I'll explain it to them face to face. And then COVID hit, so I couldn't go and meet them either. So 2020 became a really tough year. It became a make or break year. The Brand Language Studio's first year of revenue was absolutely tiny, was a proper shock to the system, as small as my first year of freelance income.
And you brought the people at the table with you as well to TBLS, or?
I tried. Some came, some didn't. In the time that I was focused on family, some of them needed writing services, some of them needed brand language support, and I couldn't offer it. So I had to. The world of brand language and writers is a close, warm one. I think the people are lovely. I think writers are great people. They've got good hearts. So I was able to refer some of my work onto dear friends who are also very, very good writers, very good creative people within the world of brand. But of course, when you refer someone onto someone who's brilliant, that relationship starts. So you're sort of passing people on to other good people. And then 6 months later, when I had developed the new website for the Brand Language Studio, I developed the proposition, what I wanted the Brand Language Studio to stand for, had worked with a brilliant designer, created the visual identity, got it all out there. I then thought, I need to go. It's almost like starting again. I have to find lots of new clients now. And I need to, after COVID, which was another year or so, I need to get back out there and start meeting people and running workshops. I couldn't run any of my in-person workshops. So yeah, talking of big challenges, it's probably the personal one that led, as I tried to make the point earlier, they don't define you, these challenges. If you approach them right and you're aware of the feelings that they create within you, you can use them as a springboard to something better. So the breakup led to Moonwalking and having a great time developing the book and doing all the travels, etc. And 2020 led to what is now the Brand Language Studio, which is, I'm pleased to say, doing well again and filling my time with interesting people and interesting projects. So yeah, as long as you can see the positive that might come out of it, I think you do okay.
Just switching to the other side now, what do you think is the best, I would say, what's the highlight of your journey so far? I know that there's much more to come, and the brands that you're working with, I'm sure people who are hearing this, they probably have purchased one thing or heard of that brand in one way or another. But what is the highlight so far?
That's a very good question. I'm going to say it's not. I don't think I could say it was one brand project. For me, it's the relationships. I think being a writer is a if you approach it right, it's a ticket to meeting interesting people. And I've been lucky to meet some brilliant people in all the work that I've done and just make connection after connection after connection. So I think probably some of the trips that I've done where I've led training sessions have been the highlights and will continue to be the highlights. And they might not be famous brands, they might be tiny little brands, but it's that feeling that you've made a bit of a difference. Definitely the Gumtree project made a difference to a lot of people and to a brand. That was one of the biggest successes. We developed the tone of voice for Anglia Ruskin University, and applications to study there went up. It's a positive. The language, I know that the language had an effect on the brand. SITMAR, the Chartered Institute of Trademark Attorneys, we helped them with their events copy. So they invite trademark attorneys to events, and we supported them. We developed their tone of voice and started writing these for them. And all of a sudden the attendance shot up in there. Yeah, so I know that actually what I do makes a difference, but sometimes it's providing a copy or a tone of voice, and it's a document that goes across to a team. That's great. That's part of what I do. But actually the bigger thing is being there in front of somebody and them saying, when I came into this workshop this morning, I was terrified and I felt so exposed and nervous. And now I'm going to go home and I'm going to tell my children what I did today. And they like language and writing and reading. And I'm going to say to them, I just did the most fantastic thing today. And so for me, that I think that will always be the biggest positive and the most rewarding part of what I do.
And when you're going through, the bits where the earlier part, I think 2008, when you were saying you're working on this, and then you probably heard the word, it's just words, the phrase, I remember seeing that on your
Yeah,
website.
yeah.
And then you're going through all of that freelance stage. Did you have a gut feeling or just this belief in you that one day you'll be this successful person that you are now, or founder of TBLS and author of 3 books, etc. But or were you just sort of taking one step at a time? You didn't really have this, because I think when I'm speaking to a lot of people who are, it could either go 2 ways. They always have known, even though the circumstance didn't support that at that time, or they never really knew. What was it in your case?
I'm not sure I ever knew, but you said taking one step at a time. I'm not sure I've ever really consciously taken one step at a time. I think I've always probably taken 2 steps at a time, and then maybe one back, and then maybe 3 forwards. And it's been it's been an unpredictable journey, but I've had a belief in myself, and certainly I think it sort of strayed into arrogance in my early 20s. I think everyone listening to this who knows me will totally agree with that. I think it became a confidence, and then I think it's become an awareness of the importance of language in life, in the world. I mean, look at the world at the moment and look at how much language, the effect that language is having. So political speeches, wars, ceasefires, placards, everything is words when you think about it. Words can start wars and stop wars. They can cause kerfuffle in the Houses of Parliament and the Houses of Commons. And I think now I have such a belief in the power of what I do, not because I do it. So that was the arrogance, I think, to start with, that I thought I was the important part in this. I don't think I am the important part in this. I think the words that I am able to put together and produce are the important part, and the effect that those words have on other people, and as a result have on societies and have on this world and this planet. So that, I think, is what guides me and continues to guide me. I think I've had to learn that as I've gone through my career, but I've had I think I've probably had an innate belief always in the power of language and what I do, and that I hope and I don't believe will ever fade.
I think that's really interesting. And if you were to look back to 2008, Rob.
Yeah. Oh, that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a long time ago, actually.
I'm just thinking back on what's happened in those last 15 years or so. Yeah.
What would you tell him? Maybe from the things that you've heard from other people, or it could be from your experience personally.
What pass on to younger Rob?
Yes.
I would say he might not listen to me because he's quite arrogant. He might just sort of swipe me to one side. But I think all I would encourage him to do is be aware. I think that's what I'd pass on. I'd say you're likely to have lots of ups and lots of downs, but there will always be a pleasant, in your career as a writer, middle ground. So when you're at your highest, don't think that you're the best thing that's ever been, and when you're at your lowest, don't think you're the worst thing that's ever been. Be aware that life is this sort of wave, and if you can pay attention to what's happening at the highest highs and the lowest lows, you'll do okay. Just stay grounded and stay aware, and you'll improve as a writer, which is probably all you really want to do during your life.
Just a rogue question here.
Go on.
What was one thing that you used to put on a pedestal that you no longer sort of see it that way anymore?
All right, he's rogue and brilliant. Okay, a reflection on that is, I think I wasn't ever a great chaser of money, and I'm glad I wasn't. Money's come, which is lovely. I earn a living from writing, but I never really chased it. But I think I chased, or I looked at other writers, other brand language people who were. You've used the word success a few times, and I find it an interesting word because it's almost subjective. So I think I thought that success was working with, I don't know, Nike, say, must work with Nike, and then people will know that I'm a successful copywriter or I'm a successful brand language expert or whatever it is. And I think I've realized that that's not so important. Improving Nike's communications is as important, or yeah, it's on the same pedestal as Margaret in finance being terrified of writing and then coming out the other end of a workshop going, I've got a bit more confidence now. Thanks, Rob. So I think the pedestal was possibly the big brands and the big projects, and that gave me a definition of success that was maybe misleading. And if I work with Nike, great, but I'm not going to chase. I probably chased early in my career to work with the bigger brands, and I learnt from it, and it was one of those things that I would say to young Rob, look, pay attention to why you think working with Nike is a great thing. Does it really matter? Is that really how to measure success or not? Now I've realized it's not. You could probably have less positive effect on somebody's life working with a big brand, possibly, I'm not too sure, than working closely, intimately with someone who you can really make a difference to them. So yeah, maybe the big brands and those big kind of glossy projects were on a pedestal that now they're just on a nice positive shelf with everything else.
And then now looking into the future. Exciting, right?
Yeah.
There's AI and all of that. And I think you touched on that very earlier just now.
Yeah.
Is it scary? Because for a lot of people, it's scary. How is it for the writers, for the industry? How do people perceive it?
Because it's so nascent, so young and underexplored right now, everybody I speak to seems to have a different feeling about it in my area in brand language. Some are imagining that it doesn't really exist and therefore they don't have to worry about it. Some are properly embracing it. I listened to Radio 4, I think it was yesterday, and an author said that she it was really interesting. She said, I think she was essentially saying, I don't like writing first drafts, but I love editing. She said, I love seeing all of this language and then pulling out a narrative from it. Like there's so much and I'm molding it into shape. So she said, I now use AI to write my first draft and I edit AI. And I thought, how that's fascinating. It's not right and it's not wrong. It's just interesting. So she's found a way to work alongside AI, which will work for her long term. I'm sure she was very excited by it. I know agencies who are doing a similar thing. They're challenging AI to, say, develop a tonal principle in a tone of voice and then questioning AI on why it's done that and then refining it and molding it because it's not quite right or it's doesn't have that human heart, quite human. And as I say, at the other end of the scale are people who are just ignoring it and saying, look, as long as I get to the end of my career before it takes over, then I'm fine. Personally, I'm continuing the way I am and I'm not shutting it out, but I'm not actively encouraging it in either, all of this new technology. I suspect longer term it will open up new opportunities for writers. Again, a good friend very early in my career said, if you can write, you'll always be employed. And that stayed with me. I think even if AI starts doing a large percentage of what I have always done, there will always be a role for someone who has a passion for language to work alongside with, in some way interacting with future technologies. But if you love writing and you love language, you'll always find a way to make a living from it and have it as part of your life.
Thank you so much, Rob. I've learned plenty about how you view challenges, especially on failure and rejection. And I love that advice that you gave to 2008 Rob on how, just being aware that when you're at your highest, you're not going to stay there forever, but when you're at your lowest, same thing, and just being level-headed throughout the way, just knowing that things will come and go, and everything will be okay. So thank you so much, Rob, for today. It's really nice meeting you again, and have a lovely rest of the week.
My pleasure.
And
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much.
thank you.